Welcome back to the History of Bosnia and Herzegovina podcast. I'm your host, Haris Porcic, and this is episode 5. In this episode, we journey into the medieval Banate of Bosnia, a pivotal era where Bosnia was ruled by local lords bearing the title of Ban. Bosnia transformed from a nominal vassal state into a de facto independent realm under its own bans. This period laid the foundations of Bosnian statehood, characterized by political resilience, unique religious developments, and a blossoming of culture and trade. So let's get into it. Our story begins under the shadow of two medieval empires, Hungary to the north and Byzantium to the east. In 1136, Hungary's King Bela II marched an army into Bosnia and claimed a token victory. To commemorate this, he adopted the title King of Rama, referring to a small river with the same name in the region. In truth, however, Hungarian control remained mostly on paper. While Hungarian rulers styled Bosnia as Rama, local people continue to call their land Bosnia. The title, King of Rama, endured in Hungarian royal protocol for centuries, officially used until 1918. From the mid-12th century onward, Bosnia was administered by a local governor known as a Ban. The term Ban denotes a local ruler or viceroy governing in the name of a monarch. It was used across Central and Southeastern Europe from the 7th through the 20th centuries for various provincial lords. Its precise origin is unclear, but historians agree it's not a native Slavic word. In medieval Bosnia, the Ban was effectively the princely authority of the land, at least in title, since real power often depended on the personality of the Ban and the compliance of local nobility. Throughout the 1170s, the great powers vied for Bosnia's allegiance. The Byzantine Empire under Emperor Manuel Komnenos briefly extended influence westward, while the Kingdom of Hungary pressed from the north. Even the Republic of Venice cast an eye towards the Adriatic coastline adjoining Bosnia. Yet, these struggles between empires had little direct impact inside of Bosnia's rugged boundaries. Communications were poor and imperial capitals distant. In practice, local noble families ruled the districts only with nominal ties to either monarchy. By the 1180s, after Emperor Manuel's death, as Byzantine power receded and Hungary was preoccupied elsewhere, Bosnia emerged independent in all but name. This de facto autonomy was as much a product of geography as politics. Bosnia's mountainous terrain and patchwork of valleys bred a strong sense of localism and self-reliance. Different regions, called župas, had their own noble families and traditions, making it hard for any distant ruler to impose full control. This is a theme we will see again and again in Bosnian history. The land's fractured topography often fragmented authority and favored local powers over centralization. By around 1200, the term Bosnia referred to the heartland enclosed roughly by natural borders. The Sava River marked its northern extent, and its western reach ran near Banja Luka towards Bosanski Petrovac along the Grmić mountain. To the south, Bosnia's frontier approached Jablanica and the highlands, and to the east it met the Drina River. This core did not yet include what we now call Herzegovina, in the Middle Ages known as Hum. Hum was a separate territory mostly under the sway of Serbian princes. Nonetheless, early ties between Bosnia and Hum were significant. For example, Miroslav, a prince of Hum, was married to the sister of Bosnia's Ban Kulin. Upon Miroslav's death around 1198, the Hungarian crown even tried to claim Hum for itself, arguing it was part of Bosnia's domain. In reality, Hum's interior was like Bosnia's, governed by local magnates with loose allegiances to any king. Bosnia's boundaries and influence were thus fluid, but an independent Bosnian state was coalescing, defined by its own leaders and interests. The first Bosnian Ban known to us is Ban Boric, who appears in records around 1154. Not actually a native Bosnian by birth, he hailed from the Slavonia region in today's Croatia. Boric was likely appointed by the Hungarian crown during the push into Bosnia. He did assist the Hungarians in battle. In the 1150s, he led a Bosnian contingent to fight alongside Hungarian forces near Belgrade against the Byzantines. That campaign ended in defeat for Hungary, and as a consequence, the Byzantines under Emperor Manuel asserted authority over Bosnia for a short time. Boric fades from the pages of history after this. We know little of his fate, yet his role signifies the tug-of-war between Hungary and Byzantium for Bosnia. Things changed with the rise of Ban Kulin. If one man can be credited as the de facto founder of an independent Bosnia, it is Kulin. He became Ban of Bosnia in 1180 and ruled for an impressive 24 years until 1204. Under Kulin's leadership, Bosnia experienced an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. Kulin likely had been an influential figure even before 1180. A letter from the Pope in 1180 refers to him, implying he was already a person of importance prior to officially becoming Ban. Once in power, he wasted no time in solidifying Bosnia's autonomy and improving its fortunes. Ban Kulin's governance was marked by diplomacy and economic openness. He recognized that tiny Bosnia, wedged between powerful neighbors, needed breathing room and allies. One of his first significant moves was to foster a close alliance with the Republic of Dubrovnik. In 1189, Kulin issued the famous Charter of Ban Kulin, a trade agreement with Dubrovnik that stands as one of the oldest written state documents in all of the Balkans. This charter, dated August 29, 1189, granted Dubrovnik's merchants full freedom of movement and trade across Bosnia and promised them protection as if they were Kulin's own subjects. It was effectively a free trade pact that opened Bosnia's lands and markets to Dalmatian commerce. Kulin likely understood that Dubrovnik's friendship would be invaluable for Bosnia's economy and for diplomatic support. Indeed, the text of the charter itself is illuminating. It was written in two languages, Latin and the Bosnian Slavic language, and in two scripts, Latin and Bosnian Cyrillic, known as Bosančica, and it was written by a scribe named Radoje. Under Kulin, Hungarian influence virtually vanished from Bosnia's internal affairs. Formally, medieval writers described Kulin as a vassal of the King of Hungary, but in reality, Bosnia functioned as a largely independent state during his reign. Hungarian troops did not occupy Bosnia, nor did Bosnia pay tribute in this period. In fact, there is no evidence that Hungary exercised any direct control. No garrisons, no governors, and no call on Bosnian troops for Hungarian campaigns under Kulin's rule. Instead, Bosnia charted its own course. Kulin maintained peaceful relations with all his neighbors. His reign saw no major wars on Bosnian soil. Freed from foreign entanglements, the Ban focused on internal development and commerce. Mining of Bosnia's rich mineral resources began to flourish. Citizens of Dubrovnik could go and buy Bosnian lead, iron, silver, wax, salt, hides, and other goods duty-free, which in turn stimulated local production. This prosperity under Kulin is why folk memory hails those good days. One Balkan saying still nostalgically recalls, "Since Kulin Ban and the good old days," symbolizing remembered prosperity and justice. It is worth noting that almost all we know of Ban Kulin comes from foreign sources and a few surviving documents. Local Bosnian chronicles from this time are virtually non-existent. Church archives, Dubrovnik's records, and later folklore preserve his legacy. He died in 1204, apparently of natural causes, since there's no record of conflict or coup. Kulin was succeeded by his son, Ban Stjepan, or anglicized as Stephen, Kulinović, who ruled into the early 13th century. Kulin's wife, mentioned in documents, was a noble woman named Vojislava. With Kulin's passing, Bosnia had firmly established itself as a self-governing Banat, no longer merely a remote province to be fought over by Hungary or Byzantium. But, as we shall see, the independence that Kulin carved out would soon be tested by a new challenge, one that came not by sword, but by faith and politics. During Kulin's lifetime, an issue began to simmer that would put Bosnia in the crosshairs of its powerful neighbors: religion. In the late 1100s, Bosnia's religious scene looked rather different from the rest of Europe. The majority of Bosnians were Christians, but their practices did not neatly align with either Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy as practiced in neighboring kingdoms. Formally, Bosnia was under the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church, but Bosnian Catholics enjoyed a high degree of independence from Rome. The Bishop of Bosnia was elected by the Bosnian clergy and people, and then merely sent to the Archbishop of Dubrovnik for consecration. This was highly unusual. Elsewhere, bishops were appointed by the Pope or kings. Furthermore, Bosnian churches conducted liturgy in local Slavic language, not in Latin, as was standard for Catholic regions. The use of Slavic in Catholic rites was essentially unheard of in medieval Europe, a testament to Bosnia's isolation and local custom. The rugged terrain and poor lines of communication meant that papal authority and Orthodox authority alike only weakly penetrated Bosnia's hills. One historian aptly described medieval Bosnia as a no man's land between faiths, neither fully Catholic nor fully Orthodox. In this unique environment arose what later ages called the Bosnian Church. The Bosnian Church, or Crkva Bosanska, remains something of a mystery even today. It was a Christian church that took shape in Bosnia by mid-12th to early 13th century, and it would survive until the Ottoman conquest in the 15th century. For a long time, it was traditionally believed that the Bosnian Church was connected to the Bogomils, a dualist heretical sect that originated in Bulgaria. The Bogomils preached a form of Gnostic Christianity that viewed the material world as evil, rejecting the authority of established churches. However, modern scholarship casts serious doubt on the idea that the Bosnian Church was Bogomil or dualist. Contemporary Bosnian Church adherents did not leave writings explaining their doctrine. Almost all we know about them comes from Catholic or other outside sources denouncing them as heretics. What does seem clear is that the Bosnian Church was neither fully Catholic nor Orthodox, but a somewhat independent Christian practice that had taken root due to Bosnia's religious autonomy. The members of this church simply call themselves Kristjani, meaning Christians, or Dobri Bošnjani, meaning good Bosnians. Their clergy had unique titles. The head of the church was a djed, literally translating to grandfather, a council of 12 elders called strojnici, and wandering monks called gosti, that translates to guests. They had no elaborate cathedrals or monastic orders like the Catholic and Orthodox. In fact, the Bosnian Church built very few church buildings at all, which later led some to mistakenly think Bosnians had no churches. In reality, they likely worshipped in simple halls or outdoor spaces, and their church deliberately held no property or land, which endeared them to the common people and nobility alike. To outside eyes, particularly the Catholic bishops of Hungary and Dalmatia, Bosnia's Christians looked suspiciously like heretics. During Kulin's rule, these suspicions burst into a diplomatic crisis. Vukan, the Prince of Zeta, which is modern-day Montenegro, and the brother of Serbian Grand Prince Stefan, had his own political axe to grind. He resented Bosnia's independence and Dubrovnik's influence in church matters. In 1199, Prince Vukan wrote a letter to Pope Innocent III accusing Ban Kulin, Kulin's wife and sister, and an alleged 10,000 Bosnians of embracing heresy. Around the same time, the Archbishop of Split, who was in rivalry with Dubrovnik for ecclesiastical control, also complained to the Pope that Bosnia's church was rife with error and that Dubrovnik's clergy had neglected Bosnia. The King of Hungary, Emmerich, eagerly supported these accusations, since branding the Bosnians as heretics would give him a pretext to intervene and assert control. Pope Innocent III, a zealous reformer, took these reports very seriously. Suddenly, Kulin found himself in a dangerous position. Bosnia's religious peculiarity was about to trigger a crusade against his land. The Pope pressured the Hungarian king to stamp out the Bosnian heresy. Kulin denied any heresy, professed his own Catholic loyalty, and invited inspection. According to records, Kulin wrote letters to the Pope insisting that the Bosnians were good Christians, albeit ignorant of certain rites, and even sent some monks to Rome to be examined on their faith. To avert an invasion, Kulin took a dramatic step. He agreed to hold a church council on April 6, 1203 at Bilinopolje, near today's city of Zenica. There, in the presence of the Pope's envoy, Bosnia's leaders and church elders formally affirmed their allegiance to Rome. They renounced any practices deemed heretical, essentially admitting that any errors in Bosnian religious practice were out of ignorance, not doctrine, and pledging to correct them. They renounced a list of errors in their practice, likely things like not baptizing infants or not holding Mass properly. Kulin and the Bosnian Christians swore to follow the Catholic faith henceforth. In exchange, the Pope agreed that Bosnia's bishopric would remain under the Archbishop of Dubrovnik and not be transferred to the Hungarian Split's authority. This council at Bilinopolje essentially pacified Rome for the moment. Pope Innocent III, seeing Kulin's cooperation, backed off. He viewed Kulin as a loyal Catholic who had been misled, and Dubrovnik was a respected Catholic city to which he was comfortable entrusting Bosnia's spiritual supervision. For Ban Kulin, this was a diplomatic victory. He neutralized the immediate threat of a foreign invasion in the name of religion. The Hungarian king's opportunity slipped, at least for Kulin's lifetime. Indeed, Kulin wrote to Hungary reaffirming his vassalage and the results of the council, while in practice Hungary's hold on Bosnia remained merely theoretical. Ban Kulin died the following year in 1204, having safeguarded Bosnia's autonomy until the end. However, the Bosnian church issue did not vanish with Kulin's death. In the decades after 1203, Bosnian nobles and church leaders quietly continued their traditional practices. Despite their pledges, they did not drastically alter their homegrown church, and Bosnia continued to be viewed with suspicion by Rome. Over the 13th century, a series of attempts were made to root out the Bosnian heresy. In 1225, Pope Honorius III actually called for a crusade against the Bosnian heretics, charging the Hungarians with carrying it out. A Hungarian invasion army gathered, but as luck would have it, the Mongol incursions into Eastern Europe forced Hungary to abandon its Bosnian venture in order to defend its own realm. Then, in 1234, Pope Gregory IX took a harder line. He removed the Bosnian bishop from office for tolerating heresy and once again exhorted the Hungarian crown to take up arms against the Bosnian lords. Hungarian forces did invade Bosnia in the 1230s under the Crusade banner, only to find fierce resistance. the Bosnian nobles rallied and expelled the Hungarians, defending their land and their faith. Clearly, the Bosnians did not see themselves as heretics and were willing to fight for an intervention. By the mid to late 13th century, frustration in Rome led to a new strategy: the Papal Inquisition. In 1291, Pope Nicholas IV issued a decree, officially introducing a Franciscan-led inquisition into Bosnia to uproot heretical practices. This marked the beginning of organized missionary and inquisitorial efforts by the Catholic Church in Bosnia. The Bosnian clergy reacted by severing ties with Rome altogether, effectively creating an autonomous Bosnian church independent of both Rome and Constantinople. This was the final break that created a distinct Bosnian church organization which continued through the 14th century. Modern historians like Noel Malcolm and John Fine note that there is no evidence that the Bosnian church was truly bogomil or dualist. There were no secret dualist doctrines, just a simple Christian practice outside of papal authority. The label heretic in Bosnia's case might have been more about Bosnia's refusal to submit to Hungary and Rome than about actual theology. Many scholars now believe the Bosnian church was basically a local offshoot of Catholicism with a few novel traits, rather than an outright Gnostic sect. Regardless, outsiders continued to accuse Bosnians of bogomilism throughout the Middle Ages, and it became part of the narrative that Bosnia was a land of heretics. When the Ottoman Empire eventually conquered Bosnia in 1463, it's reported that a large portion of Bosnian church's adherents converted to Islam, possibly because they had been estranged from both Catholic and Orthodox churches and found the Ottoman Islamic rule less oppressive by comparison. The Bosnian church thus disappears from record by the late 15th century, either having faded earlier or having its remnants embraced into Islam. We will explore the Bosnian church in greater detail in a future episode. For now, what's crucial to understand is that the Bosnian heresy saga was as much a political struggle as a religious one. It was the mechanism by which Hungary and the Catholic Church tried to rein Bosnia back in, and by which Bosnia's leaders asserted their independence. Ban Kulin's skillful navigation of this crisis allowed Bosnia a precious window of peace. Yet, the constant accusations and periodic crusades also kept Bosnia embattled through the 13th century. Despite all of this, Bosnia survived as a distinct entity, with its people stubbornly clinging to their own ways of worship and governance. The political structure of medieval Bosnia under the Bans was unlike the classical feudal system of Western Europe or even its Balkan neighbors. One fundamental difference lay in land ownership and the power of the nobility. In Bosnia and Hum, the traditional Slavic clan-based organization remained very strong. Extended families, or zadrugas, held land collectively, passing it down through the family. As a result, Bosnian Bans could not easily grant or revoke land in return for service, as kings could in, for example, France or Hungary. In many feudal kingdoms, a lord who failed his duties could have his lands confiscated by the monarch. In Bosnia, however, once a noble family held land, it was effectively theirs in perpetuity. The ruler had no right to confiscate it except in cases of outright treason. There was no system of linking military service to land grants in the same way as in neighboring Serbia or Byzantium. This meant the Bosnian nobility enjoyed extraordinary independence. They had broad rights over their estates, while their obligations to the Ban were minimal and often vaguely defined. This societal structure had profound implications. It weakened the central authority of the Ban, especially in military matters. To raise an army, a Bosnian Ban could not simply command levies from his lords by right. he had to negotiate and maintain goodwill. Because the ruling Ban could not easily strip nobles of their lands, Bosnia avoided the emergence of a strong centralized feudal monarchy. Some historians argue this was a double-edged sword. It gave Bosnia local lords a great deal of resilience. Foreign powers found it difficult to conquer or subdue Bosnia because there was no single head to cut off. But it also meant Bosnia was slow to unite fully. Even as a kingdom in later centuries, internal divisions remained a constant theme. In Kulin's era, however, this system was arguably beneficial. The nobles were protective of their freedoms and thus protective of Bosnia's autonomy. It's notable, too, that the Bosnian Church found support among the nobility, since the Bosnian Church owned no land and did not demand tithes. It posed no threat to the nobles' wealth, and in fact, often the noblemen were members or patrons of that church. This alliance of sorts between the nobility and the Bosnian Church further weakened attempts by the Ban to enforce any foreign religious reform. In essence, Bosnia in the Banate period was a coalition of powerful local families loosely coordinated by the Ban, rather than a top-down feudal hierarchy. This unique social order would continue to shape Bosnia's destiny right up until the Ottoman era. The spoken language of Bosnia's medieval inhabitants was a form of South Slavic, specifically a Western Shtokavian dialect. This dialect group would much later form the basis of modern Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian standard languages. In the 12th and 13th centuries, people simply called it the Slavic language, or Slovenski. One of the most fascinating cultural markers of medieval Bosnia is its written script. Bosnians developed and used a variant of Cyrillic writing known as Bosančica, or Bosnian Cyrillic. This script originated by the 10th or 11th century and was used continuously in Bosnia, Hum, and parts of Dalmatia and Croatia up until the 18th century. Essentially, it's a stylized Cyrillic alphabet adapted for local language. The earliest known example of Bosančica is the Humac tablet, a stone inscription dating to somewhere between the 10th and 12th century. This tablet, discovered in Humac in present-day Herzegovina, is actually the oldest recorded Cyrillic inscription in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Its text, written in a mix of Cyrillic and a few glagolitic characters, commemorates the building of a church of the Archangel Michael by a local noble. The tablet's English translation reads, quote, "In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is the church of Archangel Michael, built by Krsmir, the son of Bret, in the parish of Urun, and his wife Pavica." Unquote. Bosančica was ubiquitous in medieval Bosnia for charters, letters, and inscriptions. Kulin's 1189 charter, as we noted, is written in the script. Bosančica was not the exclusive domain of any one ethnic or religious group. It was simply the script of the land, used by all communities in the region. In later centuries, this became a point of contention. 19th century nationalists in both Serbia and Croatia each tried to claim Bosančica as their own. Some Serbian scholars insisted Bosančica was just a Serbian Cyrillic variation, even arguing that the term Bosančica was a Habsburg propaganda invention. Conversely, some Croatian writers referred to it as Arvatica, attempting to paint it as a Croatian script. But in reality, it was used in Bosnia, Hum, Dalmatia, and even by Dubrovnik in the Middle Ages, cutting across modern ethnic lines. The script stands as a testament to the shared medieval heritage of these regions. This regional script outlived the medieval Bosnian state by centuries, with sporadic use even in the 20th century in some small communities. Parallel to the written culture, Bosnia developed a remarkable monumental art form, its medieval tombstones, known as stečci. If you wander the Bosnian countryside today, especially in remote valleys and highland plateaus, you will encounter mysterious stone tombstones, often massive monolithic blocks, sometimes slabs or crosses, carved with symbols and figures. These stečci began to appear in the mid-12th centuries and continued to be made until the Ottoman conquest in the 15th century. They are a uniquely Bosnian and Herzegovinian phenomenon, though some are found in parts of Croatia, Montenegro, and Serbia as well. Over 70,000 stečci have been recorded at more than 3,300 sites, with more than 60,000 in Bosnia and Herzegovina alone. An astounding number, speaking to a widespread cultural practice. One of the most striking aspects of stečci is their interfaith character. They were used as grave markers by all three medieval Christian communities in the region: Catholics, Orthodox, and followers of the Bosnian Church. There's no strict religious symbolism that confines a stečak to one creed or another. In fact, many stečci bear a mix of Christian motifs and pagan symbols, reflecting a blended religious worldview. Common carvings include crosses, crescent moons, six-pointed stars, spirals, vine leaves, animals, and humans. You might find a medieval knight carved in relief, sword in hand, next to a swirling geometric pattern, or a woman in a long dress beneath a crescent moon and a sun. Such imagery suggests that medieval Bosnians blended Christian faith with folk beliefs and ancient symbolism, creating an artistic language all their own. In terms of inscriptions, many stečci have epitaphs chiseled in Bosančica script, often short text with the name of the deceased, perhaps a brief prayer or proverb, and sometimes the circumstances of their death. The existence of stečci also challenges later national narratives. Because they don't belong neatly to any one group, different regional ethnicities in the 19th and 20th centuries each tried to appropriate them as evidence of their own nation's medieval presence. But the scholarly consensus today is that the stečci are a shared heritage, medieval Bosnian in origin, but not exclusively tied to any one ethnicity or church. They truly represent the regional culture of that era, one where different faith traditions coexisted and even intermingled. An observation is that the stečci embody centuries of Bosnian tolerance, the coexistence of Orthodox, Catholics, and Bosnian Christians living in the same communities and choosing the same style of tombstone. In their silence, these stones speak volumes about a multicultural space in medieval Europe, something Bosnia has always been, in one form or another. During the Banate period, Bosnia's economy was primarily agrarian and self-sufficient, but with growing specialization in mining and trading. The average person was a peasant farmer or a herder engaged in subsistence agriculture, tending flocks of sheep and goats on the hills, raising a little barley or wheat in the valleys, perhaps beekeeping for honey and wax, and hunting in the forests. Travelers to medieval Bosnia often remarked on the ruggedness of the land and the hardiness of its people. Yet Bosnia was not as isolated as its terrain might suggest. As we've seen, the Ban Kulin Charter of 1189 already points to a flourishing trade with Dubrovnik, where traders exchanged goods like cloth and wine for Bosnia's raw materials, which included metals, hides, wool, and timber. Bosnian iron ore was especially important. Iron tools and weapons were in demand all over the Balkans. Silver and lead were mined in places like Olova, whose very name means lead, and Srebrenica, meaning silver town. We know from records that by the 14th century, silver from Bosnian mines was a significant export, contributing to the wealth of later Bans. Other notable exports include beeswax, honey, hides, and leather. Bosnia imported fabric, weapons, spices, and fine crafts through Dubrovnik. Over time, a class of native Bosnian merchants emerged, but in the 13th century, much trade was still in the hands of Dubrovnik merchants. Despite being landlocked, since at this point Bosnia had no direct access to the sea, the Banat thrived by acting as a commercial bridge between the Adriatic and the Balkan interior. Bosnia's neighbors recognized the land's resources. Both Hungary and Serbia coveted its mines and forests. Finally, it's worth touching on the ordinary life and culture of Bosnians in this era. They would have spoken in local dialects of Slavic, possibly already distinguishing themselves as Bošnjani, meaning Bosnians. Their clothing was likely similar to the other Balkan highlanders, homespun wool garments with embroidered motifs that might even echo the symbols seen on the stičci. They practiced a mix of Christianity and folk customs. Music, oral epic poetry, and dance were surely part of village life, though our records of these from the 13th centuries are scant. The kolo, meaning the circle dance, was documented on multiple stičci. There was a meeting of worlds in Bosnia, the Adriatic Mediterranean influence creeping in through trade and Catholic connection, and the indigenous Illyrian and Slavic culture of the countryside. This fusion created something unique, a Bosnian identity that was distinct by the time of the Banat, not just a blend of Serb or Croat or Hungarian, but its own Bosnian character. By the end of Ban Kulin's era, Bosnia had secured its place as an independent political entity, a Banat with its own borders, its own church, and its own way of life. It weathered attempts by powerful neighbors to dominate it, whether through arms or theology, and it cultivated a sense of Bosnianness rooted in local tradition and multi-faith coexistence. The Banat period, stretching from the mid-1100s until 1377, was a formative age. Over the next century and a half, Bosnia would have other notable bans. It would expand its territory under the capable Ban Stjepan Kotromanić in the 14th century, and eventually, under Ban Tvrtko, it would be elevated to a kingdom in 1377, when he crowned himself King of Bosnia. That, however, is a story for a future episode. As we close this episode, consider the legacy of the Banat. Strong local governance, religious independence, and cultural creativity. These themes echo throughout Bosnian history. The Stečak tombstones still stand in silent fields. The Charter of Kulin is still celebrated as an early declaration of Bosnian statehood. And the phrase "since the days of Kulin Ban" still signifies the good old days when Bosnia ruled itself in peace. Join me in the next episode as we follow Bosnia's journey into its medieval golden age and the challenges that lay beyond. Thank you for listening to the History of Bosnia and Herzegovina podcast. If you have questions or comments, feel free to reach me by visiting historyofbosnia.com or through social media. The links are in the show notes. Until next time, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.